The morning sun blazed over the U.S. Military Academy, painting the parade grounds gold and sharp. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and arrogance, the kind that clung to young men and women who had never tasted real battle, but believed they were born for it. Rows of cadets stood rigid in formation, boots scuffing the gravel. Their uniforms were crisp, their pride sharper than the crease on their sleeves. They'd been through tough weeks of training already, but today felt different. A new instructor was coming, a civilian consultant, they'd heard, someone sent to toughen them up. When the woman walked onto the field, the whispers began. She wasn't tall, maybe mid-30s, her brown hair tied neatly beneath a plain cap. She wore simple tactical gear, no rank, no insignia, just a black shirt tucked neatly into faded combat pants. She moved quietly, without the swagger of military officers. Her eyes, calm, focused, unreadable, scanned the cadets like she'd seen them all before. "Cadets," barked Major Red, a commanding officer. "This is Instructor Avery. She's here for a short-term combat readiness session. You will treat her with full respect." Avery gave a small nod. No salute, no speech. Just a nod. The silence stretched until one of the cadets, a tall, broad-shouldered kid named Marks, muttered under his breath, "Respect for what? She's not even in uniform." The words were quiet, but the smirk that followed wasn't. Avery caught it. She didn't react. Instead, she turned to the platoon and said evenly, "Pair up for contact drills." 2 lines, front against back. The cadets shuffled into position, still half amused. They were used to shouting instructors, spit flying, veins bulging, not someone who spoke calmly, almost softly, like she was reading from a script she'd written herself. "Hand-to-hand combat," she said. "Not about power, about awareness, control." Mark snorted. "Yes, ma'am, control." She met his eyes for a moment. "You'll demonstrate with me." The other cadets chuckled, sensing a show. Marks was one of the Academy's best, strong, confident, and loud enough to fill a room. Facing a woman half his size looked like easy glory. They squared off. Avery's stance was loose, almost lazy. She didn't raise her hands high or tighten her jaw. She just waited. "Begin," Major Red called out. Marks lunged, too fast, too hard, reaching for her shoulder to push her back. His movement was predictable, careless. Avery sidestepped smoothly, using his momentum. In one fluid motion, she grabbed his wrist, pivoted, and flipped him onto his back. The ground cracked beneath him as the air left his lungs in a shocked grunt. The laughter stopped. Ava released him instantly and stepped back, silent, her face unreadable. Mark scrambled to his feet, embarrassed, cheeks burning red beneath the dirt. "Again," she said calmly. This time, anger guided his movements. He charged harder, throwing his full weight forward. Avery didn't move until the last second. Then a blur. She twisted, his arm bent, his balance gone, and once again, he hit the dirt, harder this time. Now the laughter returned, not at Avery, but at him. "Enough!" Mark snapped, climbing to his feet. His pride hurt more than his body. The smirk was gone, replaced by humiliation. "You got lucky." "Luck," she said softly, "is what people call skill when they don't understand it." The words sliced through him like a blade. He lunged again, this time not in practice, in frustration. The shove came fast and reckless. Avery didn't resist. She fell backward into the dirt, landing hard, dust rising around her boots. The cadets froze. For a long second, no one spoke. The silence was heavy, awkward. Mark stood above her, chest heaving, realization dawning too late. But Avery didn't shout, didn't glare. She lay still for a heartbeat, then calmly pushed herself up, brushing the dust from her elbows. When she stood, her posture changed. It wasn't loud or obvious, just something in the way her shoulders squared, how her eyes sharpened. She looked at Marks the way a wolf studies prey. "Again," she said quietly. "No, ma'am, again." Her voice carried no anger, just command, the kind that made even Major Red straighten unconsciously. Marks hesitated, swallowed, then moved forward slowly. Avery didn't wait this time. She struck, a blur of precision. In 3 seconds, he was on the ground again, this time face down, her knee pinning his shoulder blade. Her hand locked his wrist just enough to make him feel it, the edge between pain and injury. "Control," she whispered near his ear, "is knowing when to stop." Then she released him and stood. Marks didn't move. He stayed on the ground, stunned, breathing hard. The rest of the cadets stood rigid, eyes wide. No one laughed now. Avery turned to the rest. "You'll all fall," she said. "In training. In combat. In life. But the difference between a fighter and a survivor is how fast you get up." Her words lingered in the dry morning air. Even Major Red, a man known for shouting over storms, said nothing. She dusted off her hands, looked over the group, and added, "Again, pairs. Start over." They obeyed without hesitation this time. As drills resumed, the cadets stole glances at her, no longer mocking, but curious, maybe even wary. The calm woman who'd been thrown into the dirt and got up without blinking, now commanded the entire field without raising her voice. One cadet, a quiet boy named Lopez, whispered to his partner, "She's not normal. Nobody moves like that." His partner nodded. "I think she's seen the real stuff." From the sidelines, Avery paced slowly between rows, watching, correcting form, offering brief, precise feedback. Her tone was steady, never cruel, never boastful. But every movement carried the weight of someone who'd done this under fire, not just in training. When one cadet fumbled a block, she said quietly, "You're afraid of falling. Don't be. The ground is honest. It always tells you the truth." By the end of the hour, the dust clung to everyone's skin. The cadets were exhausted, drenched in sweat, but silent. As Avery dismissed them, Major Red called out, "Instructor Avery, a word?" She walked over, expression calm. Red's voice dropped low. "You handled that well. I thought most civilians would have lost their temper." "I'm not most civilians," she said, eyes fixed on the horizon. He studied her a moment, something like recognition flickering behind his stern face. "No, I suppose you're not." She turned and walked off the field, her boots leaving faint prints in the dust. Behind her, the cadets whispered again, but now the tone had changed. There was no laughter, only curiosity. "Who is she?" someone asked. Marks, still rubbing his shoulder, muttered, "Whoever she is, I don't ever want to fight her again." And as the wind swept across the training field, carrying away the dust and echoes of the morning's arrogance, a quiet realization settled over them all. The woman they'd underestimated wasn't there to be tested. She was there to test them. The next morning, fog lay heavy over the academy's training grounds. It rolled across the parade field like a low tide, swallowing the outlines of the barracks and blurring the sharp lines of discipline. The cadets formed up in silence, boots thudding against damp earth. None dared speak of what had happened the day before, though every mind replayed it in detail. The moment Instructor Avery had risen from the dirt, the quiet fury in her eyes, and the effortless way she'd turned the cadets' arrogance into submission. Marks, who had been the one to shove her, stood stiff in formation. His arm still ached from where she'd pinned him. He hadn't slept well. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, calm, unreadable, like stone weathered by years of storms. When Avery appeared through the fog, the cadets went silent without being told. She carried a training helmet in one hand, her other resting casually in her pocket. No rank on her chest, no patch on her shoulder. Just that same quiet authority that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond the academy walls. "Good morning," she said, her tone even. "Yesterday, you learned that falling doesn't make you weak. Staying down does. Today, we learn control." The fog muffled her voice, but every cadet heard her clearly. She split them into groups, assigning drills with crisp efficiency. Her commands were short, a gesture here, a word there, and somehow, everything moved smoother than any session before. Avery moved among them like a ghost. She corrected posture, adjusted grips, and demonstrated holds with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, not in front of students, but in places where mistakes got people killed. Every so often, her eyes drifted, not unfocused, but as if scanning invisible perimeters. The kind of awareness soldiers carried long after they left field. By mid-morning, the drills intensified. Sweat darkened their uniforms, breaths came shorter, and even the strongest among them struggled to keep up. Yet Avery seemed tireless. She demonstrated full takedowns without breaking a sweat, her movements efficient, stripped of all wasted motion. "Relax your shoulders," she told one cadet. "You're trying to overpower your opponent. You don't win fights with strength. You win with understanding." The cadet frowned. "Understanding what, ma'am?" "Yourself," she said simply, and walked away. Her simplicity frustrated them. No grand lectures, no shouting, just quiet truths that seemed to cut deeper than any drill. During the short break, the cadets gathered under the awning, gulping water and whispering. "She's gotta be military," said Lopez. "You saw how she handled marks. That's not self-defense training. That's combat stuff. Then why's she not wearing a uniform?" Another asked. "Maybe she got kicked out," someone else suggested. Marks shook his head. "No, I don't think she got kicked out. I think she walked away." A hush fell over them as Avery passed by, her expression unreadable as ever. She stopped for a moment, watching them with eyes that seemed to measure more than their posture, their attitude, their character, maybe even their fear. "You're all very good at talking," she said, voice calm. "Let's see how good you are at listening." They scrambled back into formation. The next exercise was close quarters combat. Avery paired the cadets unevenly, smaller against larger, rookies against naturals. The goal was to teach adaptation under pressure. But this time, she didn't just watch, she joined. "Cadet Lopez," she said, gesturing him forward. "You and I." The others gathered, forming a circle. Lopez looked nervous, but nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Avery motioned for him to attack. Lopez lunged cautiously, testing her defenses. She moved like smoke, never blocking, always redirecting, each motion efficient and controlled. Within seconds, Lopez's balance was gone. She swept his leg, pivoted, and he landed flat on his back. Avery stepped aside and helped him up, her grip firm but not unkind. "What did you learn?" He rubbed his arm, breathing hard. I hesitated." She nodded. "Hesitation is fine. Panic is not. You can hesitate and still win if you stay calm." Then, as if nothing had happened, she turned to the next cadet. By noon, half the platoon had faced her. None had lasted more than 10 seconds. The cadet's arrogance was gone. In its place, respect. But with respect came curiosity, and with curiosity came whispers that wouldn't die. After the session, a few cadets lingered outside the training hall. The fog had lifted, but the mystery only thickened. Lopez leaned against the wall, glancing around before speaking. "You know what's weird? I checked the instructors list. There's no Avery anywhere. Not on payroll, not on guest rotation. Marks frowned. You checked? Yeah, Lopez said. I was curious. She's not in the system. At all. That set the group buzzing. So what, she's a ghost? Maybe she's some kind of intelligence officer? Or Black Ops trainer, someone whispered dramatically. They laughed nervously, but deep down, the thought unsettled them. That evening, Avery sat alone at the far end of the cafeteria. She wasn't eating, just sitting, posture straight, eyes on the window, where the sunset bled orange across the hills. A few cadets passed by, debating whether to approach her. None dared. Major Red entered, tray in hand, and spotted her. Mind if I sit? He asked. She gave a small nod. You made quite the impression, he said with a faint grin. Cadets can't stop talking about you. Good, she replied, her tone neutral. Talking means thinking. Thinking means learning. He studied her for a moment. They don't know who you are, nor do they need to. You know, he said slowly, the last time I saw moves like yours was in Virginia Beach, training ops for special warfare candidates. Her expression didn't change. That was a long time ago. Red leaned back. You're not just another instructor, are you? Avery's gaze stayed fixed on the window. I'm just here to teach them humility, Major. There was something in her voice, the quiet exhaustion of someone who'd carried too many ghosts, too many memories that didn't fit into a uniform. Red nodded once. Fair enough. He stood to leave, but before he did, he said softly, they'll figure it out eventually. She didn't answer. That night, the whispers turned to research. A few tech-savvy cadets dug deeper, searching old records, training reports, archived missions. And that's when the first clue appeared. A classified after-action report, redacted but partially legible, mentioned a Lieutenant Commander Avery Kane, Navy SEAL, awarded commendations for valor in Somalia and Afghanistan. Status, retired, location unknown. Lopez stared at the screen, heart pounding. Lieutenant Commander. Navy SEAL? He whispered. Marks leaned over his shoulder. That can't be her. Navy SEALs are men. Not all of them, Lopez said quietly. Not anymore. The realization hit them like a weight. The calm instructor who spoke of control, who never raised her voice, she had seen real war. Outside, the wind howled softly against the dorm windows. Inside, silence fell. For the first time, they understood why she moved like she did, why she spoke like she'd lived through things textbooks couldn't teach. The next morning, Avery stood before them again, same calm expression, same quiet authority. But this time, every cadet's posture was different. There was respect now, not forced by command, but earned by truth. Today, she said, we train for endurance. Not for your bodies, for your minds. No one questioned her. No one smirked. And as the sun climbed higher, she watched them push past exhaustion, through pain and pride alike. The arrogance that had once filled the field was gone, replaced by discipline, the kind forged not by fear, but by understanding. As they ran, Marks caught her eye. For a brief second, she gave him the faintest smile, a flicker of acknowledgement, maybe forgiveness. He straightened his shoulders and ran harder. From that day forward, no one dared call her just a civilian again. The dawn came cold and merciless. A sharp wind rolled off the Hudson River, cutting through the early mist that hung over the academy's training fields. The cadets stood in formation, eyes half open, breath fogging in the chill. It had been 2 weeks since Instructor Avery arrived. 2 weeks since their arrogance had been stripped down to the bone. They still didn't know much about her. She said little, smiled rarely, and disappeared after every session without a trace. But one thing had become clear. She demanded nothing less than their absolute best, not for her, but for themselves. Major Red watched from a distance, arms crossed, as Avery paced before the cadets. There was no need for her to shout. Her presence alone commanded attention. The once boastful Marks stood among the front row, posture perfect, jaw tight with determination. The memory of that first day, the dirt, the laughter, the lesson, still burned in his mind like a scar. Avery stopped walking and spoke softly. You all think you've improved. You have. But improvement isn't the same as transformation. Today, you'll learn the difference. She turned toward the field, where a complex obstacle course had been set up, mud trenches, climbing walls, barbed wire crawls, and rope bridges stretched over cold water. The cadets had seen it before, but something in her tone told them this time would be different. This, she said, gesturing toward it, isn't about strength. It's about trust. Each of you will move as a unit. You fall behind, your team fails. You quit, your team suffers. In combat, ego kills faster than bullets. Her words hit hard. The cadets broke into teams of 4. Avery stood back, arms folded, watching with an expression that betrayed neither approval nor disappointment. Go. They launched into the course, mud splashing, boots pounding. At first, the shouts were confident, the pace steady. But the course wasn't built to test speed. It was built to crush pride. The first obstacle, a high wall, stopped them cold. One cadet tried to climb alone, hands slipping in the wet dirt. Avery's voice cut through the wind. Teamwork, not showmanship. Marks crouched, lacing his fingers together. Use me, he said to Lopez. Lopez climbed onto his shoulders, reaching the top with effort. Then he leaned down and pulled Marks up after him. For the first time, there was no hesitation, no laughter, only coordination. Avery nodded slightly, though none of them saw. The next obstacle, a crawl through knee-deep mud under barbed wire, drained their energy fast. The cold water bit into their hands. Their breath came in ragged gasps. Still, Avery's voice carried calmly through the wind. Keep your head down. Keep moving forward. Marks glanced sideways at Lopez, whose arms trembled with fatigue. He wanted to stop, to rest. But then he remembered Avery's words. You fall behind. Your team fails. He grit his teeth and pushed harder. By the time they reached the rope bridge, most of the cadets were barely standing. Wind whipped against the ropes. Water churned below. Fear flickered in a few eyes, not of falling, but of failing in front of her. Avery walked slowly along the riverbank, watching. Balance, she said. Don't fight the wind. Work with it. Mark stepped onto the rope first, wobbling as it swayed. This is insane, he muttered. Lopez followed behind, clutching the rope so tightly his knuckles went white. Halfway across, a gust hit hard. The rope lurched and Lopez slipped, his leg dangling over the edge. Lopez! Mark shouted, trying to reach him. The cadets on the other side froze. Avery's voice cut sharp and steady. Don't panic. Trust your partner. Mark stretched his arm out, catching Lopez's wrist just in time. Got you! He grunted, hauling him back onto the rope. They clung there, trembling but alive. When they reached solid ground, Avery stood waiting. What did you learn? She asked quietly. Lopez was still panting. That sometimes you need someone else to catch you. Avery's gaze softened, just a fraction. Exactly. Leadership isn't about standing above. It's about lifting others when they fall. Her words hung in the air like scripture. The teams finished the course in silence. Every cadet crossed that last muddy stretch on their hands and knees, but none gave up. When the final whistle blew, they stood, covered in filth and sweat, faces streaked with dirt, but standing together. Avery surveyed them, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke. "You've just completed what most of you thought was impossible. Remember that feeling. That's not victory. That's humility. The kind that keeps you alive." The cadets looked at one another, bruised, exhausted, but proud. As they broke formation, Marks approached her hesitantly. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady, "I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up on us." Avery looked at him for a long moment. "I never give up on anyone who's still standing." Then softer, she added, "Just remember, you earned this. I only showed you where to start." She turned and walked away, her boots squelching through the mud, leaving behind a silence heavier than applause. Later that evening, the cadets gathered in the mess hall. Normally, laughter echoed off the walls, but tonight the air was thick with reflection. They spoke quietly, replaying the day's trials, every obstacle, every slip, every moment of near defeat. Lopez leaned over his tray. "You ever notice how she never yells?" Marks nodded. "Yeah, it's like she doesn't need to. You just want to do better when she looks at you." Another cadet, Alvarez, chimed in. "It's weird. When Major Red shouts, you move because you're scared. When she talks, you move because you respect her." That simple observation lingered longer than any lecture could. At the far end of the hall, Major Red stood quietly, listening. He'd trained hundreds of cadets over the years, seen dozens of instructors come and go. But none commanded this kind of loyalty, this silent admiration. He turned to his aide. "She's changing them," he murmured. "Not through fear, but through example." The aide nodded. "Sir, she's doing more than training them. She's teaching them how to be human." Red didn't respond. He just stared toward the window, where the last traces of daylight faded behind the hills. Somewhere out there, Avery was walking alone, as she always did after drills, calm, reflective, burdened with memories no one could guess. Outside, the night had grown cold. Avery walked the perimeter path, boots crunching over gravel. She stopped by the obstacle course, now quiet under the moonlight. The rope swayed gently in the breeze, the water below dark and still. She crouched down, scooping a handful of dirt and letting it run between her fingers. The scent of it, sweat, earth, metal, brought back memories she'd buried long ago. Training camps overseas, operations in silence, the faces of teammates who hadn't made it home. She closed her eyes and took a long, steady breath. Behind her, footsteps approached. "Ma'am?" She turned. It was Marks. He stood awkwardly, hands in his pockets. "Sorry to bother you. I just wanted to say something." Avery tilted her head. "Go on." He hesitated. "When I first met you, I thought you were just another instructor trying to prove something. But you weren't. You were trying to make us prove something to ourselves." Her expression softened. "That's all I ever wanted." Marks nodded. "Whatever you did out there today, it worked. We're different now." Avery looked past him at the obstacle course. "Good," she said quietly, "because the real test isn't here. It's when you leave this place and the world doesn't play fair." She gave him a small nod, and he returned it with a salute. Then she turned away, her silhouette fading into the night. The following week began quietly. The academy had settled into its rhythm. Early drills, tactical lectures, and endless hours of physical endurance. But something had changed. The cadets now moved with sharper precision, quieter discipline, and above all, a strange kind of reverence for their new instructor, Lieutenant Avery Cole. Still, curiosity burned like wildfire among them. No one knew where she came from. She had no social media, no photos in the Academy's records, no medals displayed in her quarters. Even Major Red seemed to speak of her with careful respect. "Who is she, really?" Lopez whispered one night in the barracks. Marks, sitting on his bunk, shrugged. "Whoever she is, she's not just a regular trainer. Did you see the way Red steps aside when she talks? Even the colonel doesn't interrupt her." Alvarez leaned forward. "I heard she used to train special forces overseas. Someone said she was part of a classified unit. Maybe Delta, maybe SEALs." A silence fell. "She's too calm," Lopez said. "The kind of calm you only get after seeing real combat." Marks didn't answer. But deep down, he knew Lopez was right. Avery carried herself like someone who'd faced death before and learned not to flinch. 2 days later, the mystery deepened. The cadets were in tactical classroom training, going over crisis response protocols. Avery stood at the front, her voice clear and steady. "You can memorize 1,000 procedures," she said, "but when chaos hits, instinct takes over. What you train becomes who you are." She drew a quick diagram on the board, a building layout, with points of entry and choke zones. "Now," she continued, "you're leading an evacuation under fire. Civilians trapped, comes down, zero visibility. What's your first move?" Hands shot up. Marks answered confidently. "Secure the perimeter, establish communication lines, then move the civilians out." Avery studied him, then asked, "And what if the perimeter is gone? The comms are fried? You're outnumbered?" He hesitated. "Then we adapt?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Adapt? Good word. But adaptation isn't improvisation. It's controlled instinct. You don't panic, you pivot." Her voice grew softer, distant, as if she was no longer talking to them, but to herself. "Sometimes you have 3 seconds to decide whether 20 people live or die." The room fell silent. Marks noticed her hand trembling slightly as she drew another line on the board, just for a second, before she steadied it. Then she turned abruptly. "That's enough for today." Without explanation, she walked out. The cadets looked at each other in confusion. None of them had ever seen her lose composure. Later that evening, curiosity won. Marks went to Major Red's office. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" Red looked up from his paperwork, sensing what was coming. "Go ahead, cadet. It's about Lieutenant Cole, the way she trains us, the things she says. It's like she's lived it. We all respect her, sir, but who is she?" Red leaned back, eyes narrowing. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a sigh, he stood and walked to a locked cabinet. He took out a thin file, its edges worn, the cover marked restricted. He placed it on the desk, but didn't open it. "You didn't hear this from me," he said quietly. "Cole's record isn't for public eyes. But you're not wrong. She's lived more than most soldiers ever will." He sat down, lowering his voice. Avery Cole was one of the first women to complete Navy SEAL combat integration. She went through Bud S training, the same course men fail by the hundreds, and she passed. Quietly. Without press, without ceremony. Marks's eyes widened. "She's a SEAL?" Red nodded. "Not just that. She served in classified operations overseas. Joint missions, Black Ops, counter-terror units. Her team was ambushed in Kandahar. Half of them didn't make it out." He paused, his tone heavy. "She did, barely. After that, she left active duty, said she was done with war. But the Pentagon insisted she stay in training command. They knew she was too valuable to let go." Mark sat in stunned silence. The weight of it hit him like a punch. "So that's why she's here," he murmured. "She's not teaching us tactics. She's teaching us survival. Red gave a small, knowing nod. Now you understand. But be careful with that knowledge. She doesn't talk about her past for a reason. The next morning, training resumed as if nothing had happened. Avery's composure was back, controlled, confident, unshakable. But Mark saw her differently now. Every movement, every word carried new meaning. When she corrected a stance, it wasn't for form. It was for life or death precision. During the live simulation drill, she demonstrated close-quarter maneuvers. The cadets watched as she disarmed a mock opponent in under 3 seconds, flipping him to the ground before anyone blinked. "Speed doesn't save you," she said, standing over him. "Control does. You win not because you're faster, but because you're calmer." Her eyes flicked toward Mark's. "Care to try?" He stepped forward nervously. She handed him the fake knife. "Attack me," she ordered. He hesitated. "Ma'am, attack." He lunged. In a blur, she sidestepped, caught his wrist, and twisted gently enough not to hurt, but fast enough to leave him breathless on the ground. She looked down at him, not smiling, but approving. "Good effort. You think before you strike. That's rare. But next time, don't think. Trust your training." As she helped him up, Marks noticed the faint scars on her forearm, small, circular burns, the kind only made by shrapnel or fire. He didn't ask. But now, every cadet who witnessed that moment carried a new level of respect. That night, the whisper spread quietly through the dorms. "Did you hear? She's a Navy SEAL, like the real deal." "No way." Marks heard it from Red himself. By morning, the rumor had traveled through every hall. But unlike other gossip, this one didn't inspire mockery or arrogance. It inspired awe. Suddenly, her silence wasn't intimidating, it was sacred. The cadets stood straighter, spoke less, trained harder. Every drill became personal. Every order, gospel. And though Avery never confirmed the rumor, she sensed the shift. She saw it in their posture, their eyes, their effort. After class one afternoon, she stopped Marks as the others left. "You've been distracted," she said quietly. He stiffened. "No, ma'am, just thinking." "About?" He hesitated. "About you. About what you've been through." Her expression changed, not anger, but caution. "Whatever you think you know," she said softly, "keep it to yourself. The past isn't meant to be carried by others." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She paused, then added, "But thank you for seeing more than the uniform." Her tone was so unexpectedly gentle that Marks didn't know what to say. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone, the weight of her words sinking in. That evening, Avery stood on the parade ground long after the sun had set. The floodlights cast long shadows across the training field. She stared toward the obstacle course, the same one where she'd broken them down and built them up again. A chill breeze brushed against her face, and for a moment she closed her eyes. In the quiet, the ghosts of her past whispered. Names, faces, orders shouted through radio static. A convoy under fire. The sand, the heat, the sound of gunfire in the night. She had buried those memories long ago, or thought she had. Now, surrounded by a new generation of soldiers, she realized why she was really there. Not to train them for war, but to make sure they survived it. As the academy lights flickered off one by one, Avery whispered to the wind, "They'll be ready this time." She turned away from the field, her figure disappearing into the darkness, not as a ghost of the past, but as the silent guardian of the future. It began before sunrise. The sirens shattered the stillness of the academy grounds at exactly 0400 hours. Cadets leapt from their bunks, scrambling to gear up. Alarms weren't rare, but something about this one felt different. The sound was deeper, urgent, relentless. "Emergency simulation move," shouted a sergeant from the hallway. Within minutes, every cadet stood in the courtyard, breath steaming in the cold. Floodlights blazed across the field, illuminating a chaos that had been meticulously staged. Smoke grenades, fake debris, burning flares. It looked and smelled like a battlefield. Then she appeared. Lieutenant Avery Cole stood before them, arms crossed, her silhouette sharp against the orange glow. Her calm presence cut through the confusion like a blade through smoke. "This," she said, voice steady and cold, "is your final test." No one moved. "For weeks, you've learned discipline, endurance, and teamwork," she continued. "Now you'll learn the one lesson that can't be taught, the ability to stay calm when everything falls apart." Her eyes swept across the line of cadets. "You'll navigate this compound, extract hostages, neutralize threats, communicate under pressure. Fail, and you start over." A beat of silence followed. Then, with a flick of her hand, she said, "Go." The cadets exploded into motion. Smoke filled their lungs as they charged into the first zone. A maze of sandbags and broken walls. Explosions from simulation rounds echoed across the field. Marks led his team, Lopez, Alvarez, and a younger cadet named Quinn, through the smoke. "Eyes up, stay low," he shouted, remembering Avery's lessons. A burst of sound startled them. A dummy grenade landed a few feet away. Without hesitation, Lopez dove on it, shielding the others with his body. The explosion was simulated, harmless, but the gesture was real. When the smoke cleared, they all looked at him. He just grinned, spitting dirt. "Guess I passed that one." Avery watched from a control tower overlooking the course. Her expression was unreadable, but her pulse quickened. This wasn't about who finished first. It was about who stayed composed when instincts clashed with fear. On her earpiece, Red's voice came through. "They're performing better than last year's class. You've done something to them." Avery didn't look away from the field. "I didn't do anything. They chose to grow." Halfway through the course, the cadets reached the hostage building, a dark, smoky structure filled with loudspeakers blaring chaos, screams, sirens, the crackle of fake gunfire. Inside, visibility dropped to almost nothing. Marks raised his hand. "Lopez, left corner. Quinn, cover the back." Lopez nodded and pushed forward until the floor suddenly gave way beneath him. A false trapdoor, part of the setup. He fell hard into a pit lined with mud and netting. "Lopez," Marks shouted, crawling toward the edge. "I'm good," came the reply. "Just go." But Marks froze. The rule was clear. No one left behind. Avery's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "Decision time, Marks. Mission or teammate?" Her tone wasn't mocking. It was testing. Marks swallowed hard. "Both." He threw down his rope, bracing himself as Lopez climbed out. Every second cost them time, but when they rejoined the others, something shifted, their movements sensed perfectly, as if trust had been forged in that instant. They cleared the rest of the building in silence, communicating only with hand signals. Every motion, every breath, was a reflection of the training Avery had drilled into them. By the time they reached the extraction point, dawn had broken. The sky blazed gold through the haze, and the cadets, battered, bruised, covered in dirt, carried the dummy hostages across the finish line. The sirens cut off. The smoke began to thin. Silence fell over the field. Then Avery stepped forward. "Drop your gear," she ordered. The cadets did, standing in formation, chests heaving. "You just completed a 6-hour simulation," she said. "You navigated every obstacle, adapted to every failure, and refused to quit. That's what real leadership looks like. Her eyes moved from one face to another, pausing on each cadet. Most people break under pressure. You didn't, and that tells me something. She stepped closer, her tone softening. You're not just cadets anymore. You're soldiers. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Lopez, still catching his breath, said quietly, "We only made it because you taught us how." Avery looked at him, a faint smile touching her lips. "No, you made it because you believed in each other." After the drill, the academy felt different. The air buzzed with energy, not pride, but quiet accomplishment. The cadets ate in silence that morning, too exhausted to talk. But beneath the fatigue was a shared sense of understanding that they'd crossed a line together. The arrogance that had once defined them was gone, replaced by respect, not just for Avery, but for the code she embodied. Later, Marks found her by the training field, sitting on a bench with a metal thermos of coffee. "Permission to sit, Mom?" he asked. She nodded. "You earned it." They sat in silence for a while, the early light spilling across the river. "That test today," Marks began. "You designed it, didn't you?" She took a sip. "Every detail. Why make it so real?" Her eyes stayed on the horizon. "Because real doesn't wait for you to be ready. You have to train your fear before fear trains you." He nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. "You know," he said after a pause, "everyone knows who you are now." The SEAL thing. Avery didn't react. She just stared ahead, her expression unreadable. "Does it change anything?" Marks hesitated. "No, ma'am. It just makes what you've done for us mean even more." A faint smile flickered at the corner of her mouth. "Good, because titles don't save you out there. Heart does." That night, Major Red gathered the cadets in the briefing hall. Avery stood beside him, arms behind her back. "Cadets," Red began, "you've completed one of the most advanced simulations this academy has ever conducted. Not one of you quit. That's unprecedented." The room erupted in tired applause. Red continued, "And you have Lieutenant Cole to thank for that." All eyes turned to her. Avery looked at the rows of faces, the same faces that once mocked her, doubted her, tested her patience. Now they watched her with admiration. "I don't want applause," she said. "I want you to remember what this feels like. The pain, the exhaustion, the unity. Because someday, when it's real, when the world goes dark, that's what will keep you alive." Her voice softened. "You are your own rescue." The words landed like a vow. When the briefing ended, the cadets filed out. But Marks lingered, watching her as she packed away her notes. "Ma'am," he said, "if you ever wondered whether what you're doing here matters, it does." Avery looked up, eyes steady. "Good, then I've done my job." He hesitated, then added, "What about you? After this program?" She paused, thoughtful. "My mission never ends. It just changes shape." And with that, she turned and walked away, boots echoing against the concrete floor. Not as an instructor, not even as a SEAL, but as something greater. A survivor, a mentor, a legend in motion. As the night settled over the academy, the cadets sat outside their barracks, staring up at the stars. For the first time, they weren't thinking about ranks or medals. They were thinking about what Avery had given them. Not tactics, but courage. And somewhere beyond the training fields, Avery stood alone, watching the horizon, where dawn would soon rise again. She smiled faintly to herself. "The real test," she whispered, "has only just begun." The week following the simulation passed like a relentless storm. Avery's training was no longer just about skills or drills. It had become an unyielding test of endurance, resilience, and mental grit. The cadets had been pushed hard, but Avery had one final challenge in mind, a crucible designed to expose every flaw, fear, and weakness. It was a heatwave morning. The sun glared down at the academy, baking the parade ground into a near inferno. Sweat slicked the cadets' bodies before the first step had even been taken. Avery stood at the center, arms folded, observing them silently. "You think you're ready?" she asked, voice low but cutting through the air like a knife. "Sir, ma'am," chorused the cadets, standing straighter, trying to mask the dread creeping into their stomachs. Avery nodded slightly. "Good. You're about to learn what happens when mental fatigue overtakes physical exhaustion. Today, I break you, to build you." Her words caused a ripple through the formation. Not a ripple of fear, exactly, but of tension, the kind that prickles at the back of the neck and lingers. The first drill was a timed endurance march, 16 miles over uneven terrain, carrying full packs weighing nearly a quarter of their body weight. The catch? Avery had intentionally left certain supply caches missing, forcing the cadets to improvise. Marks felt the weight of his pack and groaned. "Who comes up with this stuff?" He muttered to Lopez, who was adjusting his straps. Lopez smirked, though exhaustion was already showing in the lines of his face. "Someone who's been there, I guess." They fell into formation, boots pounding the dusty trail. Avery walked alongside them silently, occasionally adjusting a stride or correcting posture. She never slowed, never smiled, just observed. By the 5th mile, muscles screamed, lungs burned, and blisters formed on nearly every foot. Yet Avery's presence was constant, a silent reminder that quitting wasn't an option. "Move," she said simply when one cadet faltered. No yelling, just a word, enough to push them forward. Midway, the true test began. A hazard zone awaited them, a steep incline riddled with loose gravel, interspersed with obstacles designed to simulate a collapsed building. Cadets had to navigate it while carrying dummy victims and maintaining formation. Quinn, the youngest, stumbled halfway up. A twisted ankle sent him crashing to the ground. Marks froze for a split second, torn between helping him and continuing the drill. Then Avery's voice cut through the chaos. "Cadet Marks, decision time. Will you lead or follow?" Marks felt a jolt. The choice was clear. In a real mission, hesitation could cost lives. He knelt beside Quinn, secured his arm, and together they climbed. Every step felt like lifting the weight of the world, but each cadet in the line followed suit, instinctively covering one another. Avery's eyes scanned the line. Approval was subtle. A tilt of the head, a brief nod, but it spoke volumes. By the time they reached the river crossing, fatigue had transformed into something deeper, mental exhaustion. The water was cold, murky, and swift. They had to swim with packs, keep their victims afloat, and coordinate without speaking. Marks glanced at Avery across the water. She stood on the bank, calm, unspeaking, letting them figure it out themselves. The river was merciless. Some cadets panicked, swallowing water, struggling to keep moving. Marks caught Lopez mid-flail, keeping him from going under. Every rescue was a lesson, every gasp a reminder that survival required focus, not fear. When they emerged on the opposite bank, shivering, bruised, and mud-streaked, Avery's voice finally spoke, quiet, almost gentle. "Survival isn't about muscle," she said. "It's about clarity when chaos strikes. Panic kills faster than fatigue." The cadets shivered, not just from the water, but from understanding the weight of her words. But Avery wasn't done. Next came the mental endurance portion, the decision matrix, a series of rapid-fire crisis simulations with no clear right answer. Fire alarms, simulated explosions, confusing orders, and conflicting instructions created a storm of sensory overload. Marks's team faced a scenario where 2 hostages needed simultaneous rescue, but they only had time for one. Every instinct screamed to save the closest, but Avery's voice echoed in his mind. Control, not instinct. Trust your team. He signaled Lopez to take the first victim, while he went for the second. Both extractions were messy, far from perfect, but everyone survived. When the simulation ended, Avery finally intervened. Not perfect, she said, but controlled. That is what matters. Marks collapsed onto the dirt, hands shaking. But he finally understood. Avery had forced them to confront their breaking points, only to show them resilience beyond what they thought possible. By late afternoon, the cadets were physically drained and mentally raw. Their muscles trembled, their spirits teetered. Some whispered that they couldn't go on. Others were silent, driven by sheer stubbornness. Avery gathered them in a circle, mud-streaked and bruised, sunburned and aching. You thought you knew limits, she said, voice low but commanding. You didn't. I've watched you hit walls you didn't even know existed. And yet you rose. You adapted. You endured. That is what makes a soldier. Not victories, not medals, not recognition. It's surviving the fire and keeping your humanity intact. She looked at each cadet in turn. I have no illusions about how hard this was. But I do know this. None of you quit. That is why you are alive. That is why you are ready. Marks and Lopez exchanged a glance. Exhaustion, pain, pride, all mingled. And yet, deep down, they realized Avery's lessons had embedded something far greater than technique or endurance. Courage. That night, the barracks were silent. Cadets lay in their bunks, muscles aching, bodies bruised, but minds alive with reflection. Lopez whispered, You know, she's not just a teacher. She's something else. Marks turned. Yeah, someone who's seen death up close and knows how to survive it. And now, she's showing us. Quinn, younger and still shaky from the day, muttered, I didn't think I could do it. But I did? That's exactly what she wants, Mark said softly. To make us see that we're stronger than we think. Across the hall, Avery sat quietly, reviewing notes for the next day. She didn't need accolades or recognition. The real reward was the subtle shift she had forged in each cadet, the transformation from prideful, inexperienced boys and girls into soldiers, capable of facing the unimaginable. As the first stars appeared overhead, Avery walked outside. She paused at the training field, looking at the tracks left behind by the cadets' march, the muddy footprints from the river crossing, and the crushed grass from their relentless endurance drills. She whispered to herself, They survived their first fire. But the real fire is yet to come. In the quiet night, the academy slept, except for one woman alone, thinking of battles past and the battles yet to shape the next generation of soldiers. And somewhere deep in the shadows of the field, a faint wind carried her words, not for anyone but the cadets themselves. Your limits are illusions. Break them, or they will break you. It was late in the evening when the cadets gathered in the briefing hall. The long days of relentless training had left them drained, bodies aching, minds frayed. Yet something was different tonight. Avery had requested the session personally, and the cadets knew instinctively that whatever awaited them would be significant. She stood at the front, calm, composed, as always. But tonight there was a tension in the air, a quiet weight that made the room fall into unnatural silence. Sit, she said, and the cadets obeyed. They didn't question. They didn't joke. Something about her tone demanded full attention. Over the past 6 weeks, she began, voice measured, you've learned endurance, control, trust, and resilience. But there is one lesson that no drill, no obstacle, and no simulation could ever teach you fully. The burden of experience. The weight of choices that define life and death. Her eyes swept across the room. It's time you knew the truth about me. The person behind the instructor, behind the calm exterior, behind the lessons you've endured. A murmur ran through the room. Cadets exchanged glances, curiosity tinged with apprehension. Avery moved to the wall behind her, pulling down a projector screen. Images flickered into life. Desert landscapes, tactical operations, small units in precise formation, and blurred, classified locations. These, she said, pointing to the first image, are places where I served, where my team and I operated under conditions that few can comprehend. Missions that required absolute trust, complete discipline, and decisions that could not be undone. Marks leaned forward, eyes wide. The photos were stark, authentic, and carried the unmistakable weight of real combat. Lieutenant Avery Cole, she continued, was one of the first women integrated into Navy SEAL combat units. PUD-S training, classified joint operations, missions in hostile zones. I've been there. I've survived ambushes, I've lost teammates, and I've carried the burden of choices that no one should have to make. The cadets were silent. The weight of her revelation sank deep. Lopez whispered under his breath, She's a Navy SEAL. In real life. Avery didn't respond. She simply continued. Some of you have seen the drills, the obstacle courses, the simulations. Those were not designed to intimidate. They were designed to prepare you for a reality far harsher than any classroom. And though the circumstances may not have been life or death today, the lessons are the same. She paused, letting her words settle. What I am about to show you is what I endured, not for recognition, not for pride, but so that you may understand the gravity of your choices in the field. The projector shifted to a series of action shots. A sandstorm in Afghanistan, a convoy navigating dangerous terrain, soldiers in full combat gear moving under fire. One image stopped Marks cold, a team pinned down, taking cover behind shattered walls. He recognized the fear etched into their faces, the determination, the silence of men and women who knew that any mistake would be fatal. During one operation, Avery said, voice steady but quiet, my team and I were ambushed. Outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. Half of my unit did not survive. I made decisions in those moments, split-second decisions that saved some lives, and I will carry the memory of the rest forever. Her voice wavered, just slightly. It was the first time the cadets saw any crack in her composure. Alvarez, seated near the back, whispered, she never talks about this. Lopez nodded, gripping his knees. It's unbelievable. And terrifying. Marks felt his throat tighten. The person who had pushed them harder than anyone, who had demanded everything, who had stood silently as they broke and rebuilt. She had faced horrors, far beyond anything they could imagine. Avery's gaze swept the room again. I didn't share this to impress you. I shared this to teach you responsibility. Every decision in the field has weight. Every action echoes far beyond the moment. And every one of you, when you leave this academy, will carry choices that test your character, your courage, and your morality. She stepped closer to the cadets. I pushed you, I tested you, I broke you at times. But every drill, every challenge was to prepare you not for medals, not for applause, but for survival. Survival in a world that does not forgive arrogance or hesitation. Marks realized, in that moment, that the fear and exhaustion he had felt were not punishment. They were a preparation for understanding life in its rawest, most unforgiving form. Then Avery paused and looked at him directly. Marks, Lopez, Quinn, all of you. You have seen drills, obstacle courses, simulations. But what you have learned is not the same as what I have endured. Do not confuse endurance for experience, and do not mistake skill for wisdom. Experience carries responsibility, and responsibility is heavier than any pack or weapon. Mark swallowed. He felt the weight of her gaze. Every memory of pain, every moment of fear he had experienced during her drills, felt smaller compared to the truth she had revealed. Lopez whispered, "She's lived more than we'll ever know." Avery gave a faint nod. "Yes, and yet I am still standing. I survived not because I was invincible, but because I respected the limits, the risks, and the people around me. That is what I hope to instill in you." The room was silent. For once, no cadet spoke. Every mind was occupied with the gravity of what they had learned. They had seen her calm authority before, but now they understood the depth, the actual life and death stakes behind it. Avery finally stepped away from the projector. "You may look at me differently now. You may fear me more, or admire me more. But none of that matters. What matters is what you do with the lessons you've been given. Will you carry courage? Will you make decisions when fear presses in? Will you stand when others fall?" The cadets nodded silently. Then, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. "Good, because that is what being a soldier truly means." After the session, Marks lingered behind. "Ma'am," he said softly, voice steady but reverent, "thank you. For showing us, for teaching us, for trusting us with the truth." Avery looked at him, her expression unreadable but softening. "It's not about me trusting you. It's about you trusting yourselves." He nodded, understanding at last that all the drills, the challenges, the pain and exhaustion, it had been about building trust in his own instincts, in his own judgment, and in the team around him. Avery paused, as if reflecting. "The lessons are over for now. But remember, the world doesn't wait for readiness. It demands action, clarity, and courage." Mark swallowed hard. "I understand, ma'am." Her gaze softened. "Good. Now go. Rest. Tomorrow we continue." That night, as cadets lay in their bunks, whispers spread like wildfire. "She's a SEAL. She survived operations we can't even imagine. She's a legend." But Marks knew the truth. She was more than that. She was a survivor, a mentor, a guide, and now she had passed the most important lesson to them. Courage is forged not in comfort, but in fire. And as Avery walked the academy grounds alone under the moonlight, she felt the quiet satisfaction of having revealed the final truth. The cadets had seen her not just as an instructor, but as someone who had lived, suffered, survived, and emerged stronger. And now they had the chance to do the same. Somewhere in the shadows of the training field, the wind carried a whisper, not her own, but a promise. Carry the weight. Honor the lessons. Survive. And the cadets, somewhere in their dreams, understood the gravity of it all. The dawn was sharp and clear over the academy, crisp enough to wake even the most exhausted cadets from a restless night. The weeks of grueling drills, unrelenting simulations, and soul-testing exercises had taken their toll. Yet there was a new energy in the air, not just fatigue, but something heavier, more profound, transformation. Marks, Lopez, Quinn, and the rest of the cadets gathered at the parade ground, boots lined, posture perfect, faces streaked with dirt, but filled with a quiet pride. Avery approached, her stride calm and measured, as if she carried no weight. Yet the cadets knew better. She carried all the burdens of her past, of her fallen teammates, and of every life she had influenced, including theirs. "Today," she began, her voice steady, resonant, "we do something different. Today is not about drills, endurance, or simulations. Today is about reflection, about understanding who you've become and what you carry forward from this training." The cadets exchanged glances. Some of them felt the familiar twinge of doubt. Had they truly changed? Could they measure the growth? Avery led them to the obstacle course. Now quiet, the debris from weeks of exercises scattered like memories across the field. You've faced fire, exhaustion, and fear, she continued. You've made mistakes, been pushed to your breaking points, and learned to rely on each other. Those lessons were more than physical. They were moral. Every choice, every action, had consequences, real consequences. The world beyond these walls will demand that same awareness. Lopez, standing beside Marks, whispered, "She doesn't even need to say it." But it hits harder than any lecture. Avery caught his gaze for a moment. That's because it's true. Survival isn't about strength or courage alone. It's about judgment. And judgment is forged under pressure. She gestured toward the cadets' tracks across the field, muddy footprints crisscrossing the earth. These marks aren't just signs of exhaustion. They're proof that you've endured. Proof that you've risen above your limits. That is your legacy. Not mine, not the Academy's, but yours. The cadets spent the morning recounting their experiences. Each team shared their challenges, failures, and triumphs. They spoke of fear, pain, and moments when they thought they might give up, and how they survived because someone had their back. Mark spoke last. "When I started, I thought this was about proving myself, to the instructors, to the Academy, to my family. But I've realized it's about proving myself to me, and that's worth more than anything I imagined." Avery's gaze softened. Exactly. Strength without reflection is hollow. You've learned to survive not because I made you, but because you chose to face yourselves every day. Quinn, younger and quieter than the others, added, "And because you didn't let us fail. Even when we wanted to, even when it hurt." Avery nodded. "I didn't push you to hurt you. I pushed you to prepare you. And now you're ready for whatever comes next." After the discussion, Avery guided the cadets through one final exercise, a simulated rescue mission encompassing all the lessons of the past weeks. The scenario was intense. Multiple hostages, simulated fire zones, complex tactical decisions, and limited time. But this time, something had shifted. Marks's team moved fluidly, instinctively. Lopez and Quinn communicated silently through gestures learned under her watchful eye. Every decision was deliberate, every action coordinated. When the exercise concluded, all cadets had succeeded. The difference wasn't just skill, it was presence, clarity, and composure under pressure. Avery observed quietly from the sidelines. The pride in her eyes was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. These were no longer the same cadets she had first met, the ones who had pushed her into the dirt, who had doubted her authority. These were soldiers, forged in the crucible of her training, tempered with the wisdom of experience she had imparted. Later, in the mess hall, Major Red addressed the cadets. "You've completed the program," he said, voice echoing across the room. "But more than that, you've grown into leaders. Each of you has demonstrated courage, endurance, and integrity, qualities that will guide you for the rest of your careers." The cadets sat quietly, exhausted but attentive. "And Lieutenant Cole," Red continued, looking directly at Avery, "has done more than train you. She has imparted lessons that will last a lifetime, not just in combat, but in life. We are fortunate to have her among us." The cadets erupted into applause, but Avery waved it off. She didn't need recognition. She had already given them the most important gift, preparation for the world beyond drills, medals, and walls. After the ceremony, Marks approached Avery alone. "Ma'am," he said, voice quiet but steady, "I can't thank you enough. For everything." She regarded him for a long moment. "You don't need to thank me, Cadet Marks. You've done the work. You've carried yourself through fire. You've learned what it means to survive, to truly survive. That is thanks enough." Marks nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I understand, and I won't forget it. She gave a faint smile. Good, that's all I ask. That evening, Avery walked the grounds alone. The sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the field. She paused at the obstacle course, now quiet and still, and looked at the tracks left behind by the cadets. Marks of effort, resilience, and growth. She thought of the cadets she had molded, the young men and women who had pushed her to the limits and in turn, been pushed beyond their own. She thought of her past, of missions, comrades lost, battles fought and survived, and realized that her purpose had shifted. She was no longer in the field of combat. Her battlefield was here in shaping the next generation. And she had succeeded. Weeks later, the cadets graduated. They marched with pride, uniforms immaculate, medals shining, and hearts full of confidence. The lessons of Avery Cole, endurance, courage, judgment, trust, humility, were etched into every step, every salute. Lopez, Marks, Quinn, and the others carried not just the physical scars of training, but a deeper understanding of responsibility, resilience, and leadership. During the final salute, the commanding officer addressed the cadets. You are ready for the challenges ahead. You are leaders. You are survivors. And you have been shaped by someone who has walked the path before you, Lieutenant Avery Cole, whose legacy is now yours to carry forward. The cadets turned to Avery. She stood quietly, nodding slightly, a figure of calm strength and unwavering resolve. No words were needed. Their respect, their gratitude, and their understanding were visible in every gaze, every stance. Later, Mark stood with his friends, watching Avery leave the parade ground. She's incredible, Quinn whispered. She's more than incredible, Lopez replied. She's a legend. Marks remained silent for a moment, reflecting. Then he said softly, She taught us more than combat. She taught us life, courage, discipline, trust. That's her real legacy. Lopez nodded. Yeah, and it's ours now. As Avery walked toward the horizon, silhouetted by the setting sun, Marks realized something profound. The true impact of a teacher isn't measured in medals, praise, or recognition. It is measured in the lives they transform, the courage they instill, and the enduring strength they leave behind. Avery's legacy was not just in the cadets who survived her trials. It was in the hearts she had forged, the minds she had sharpened, and the soldiers she had prepared to face the world with integrity, courage, and unbreakable resolve. And somewhere, beyond the academy walls, Avery whispered to herself, the fire is never over. But those who survive it leave the world stronger than they found it. The sun dipped below the horizon. The cadets had graduated. The lessons endured. And the legacy of Avery Cole, Navy SEAL, survivor, mentor, and quiet hero, lived on.